Welcome back to the Strategist Is In. I'm Dr. Loren M. And as we close out this season 5, I can hardly believe it, but we're here. Thank you all. I want to take a closer look at something that shows up across leadership landscapes and what it means to be seen without always having power. Recently, I was in Argentina for a conference, and like most conferences, everything looked good and organized on paper. And, for those of us who have been on conference planning committees or attended or have any idea about organizing large events, everything looks good until you hit the ground, right? So in practice, what happened was that people showed up in the wrong venue. Some of us were in one location and we should have been presenting in a different one. Some people were on some programs, but not on others. And there were a lot of expectations and a lot of levels of confusion. And in that moment, what mattered wasn't the plan, wasn't what was on paper, it was leadership. Who was going to step in, who could calm the people, who could redirect the people without making people feel lost or embarrassed, right? Or even out of place, because many of us were traveling from different parts of the world and didn't necessarily speak the language, and we certainly weren't familiar with the location. So it all turned out fine, of course, because there were different level of leadership going on, and that let us know that there was a lot of good contingency planning that had occurred. Because the truth of the matter is that when people feel disoriented, they don't just need information because you're already, sort of spinning. You need someone who can really help you get oriented, right? So it's not just go up the street, turn that way, do this. It's like, nope, yep, we got you. Here are, some guides that can lead you that way. It's going to be fine. Just all of that stuff has to happen. And it did, right? And it got me to thinking, like, what do you need to call upon when you're in a position of leadership, either, formal or informal, and things happen because they don't always go smoothly, but people will be looking to you for answers. So this just doesn't happen in the academy. It doesn't just happen at conferences. It happens across institutions in various workplaces. And anytime there are people together, there are people who are expected to hold that room or that space together, even when they didn't design it. And often those same people are the ones who are most visible in those rooms or those spaces. So I want to talk a little bit, or maybe a lot of it, about hypervisibility. Because while it sounds like a good thing because you're seen, you're recognized, and you're at the table, the truth is that visibility is not the same thing as power. And many of us in these spaces know that. I think about it like this: leadership at higher levels is a lot like standing on a ridge, right? So you're not in the valley, you're not at the base of the mountain, you're at a ridge. And because you're on the ridge, you're visible from multiple directions. There's less cover. People can see your every movement, your decisions, your missteps very clearly, right? And the higher you go, the narrower those spaces become. But here's the part we don't talk about enough: visibility increases faster than stability. You can be seen before you're supported. you can be exposed before you have real footing. And that's where a lot of leaders find themselves, not hidden, not invisible, but standing, frankly, in plain sight without the structure underneath them to make that visibility sustainable. And for many leaders, especially women and especially women of color, visibility comes with expectation, but without protection. You're seen, but you're not always heard. You're included, and you're most certainly not always resourced. You're visible, but you're not always protected. And I saw this dynamic play out again when my colleague and I were presenting in Argentina. And there was a moment where someone in the room, let's just say they pushed back, and not casually. I'm not sure how many of you have experienced this before, but you're in a professional setting, you're presenting your research or your idea or a concept or a theory, and you're being kind of challenged on it, right? It was that tight, constrained resistance that wasn't necessarily loud, but you could feel it. Like maybe the people who were less seasoned didn't kind of feel the undercurrent, but I and my colleague did. And so the way that it kind of was framed and presented was like what counts and what doesn't, right? So some of you may have an idea of where I'm going with this, but it was about like practitioners versus scholars. And I don't even like to set that up as a us or them or up or in group, out group. It is just all nonsense, right? Because the person was really questioning if community engagement was as valuable as academic work. And I just thought, okay, here we go again, right? And then I also stepped back and thought, wow, there's some tension here between this and that. And there were practitioners in the room, there were scholars in the room, and some were both, right? Their contract had them doing both. So this comes down to some people think credibility only counts if it's recognized by the institution, whereas others think that impact happens in the community long before the institution decides to validate it. And frankly, both of those things can happen, as people are kind of famous for saying now two things can be true at once. It really just depends. And so as my colleague and I were navigating this conversation, we it was our presentation, so we were able to take ownership of it and guide the conversation. But I think it was an opportunity where we could and did step in to say this needs to be a broader conversation, like in that moment, right? It's not just about academia, and this is how institutions work across sectors, whether it's corporate, nonprofit, education, public leadership. There's always a system that determines who gets seen, who get heard, who gets advanced, who get questioned, and who gets to answer those questions, right? Hypervisibility also shows up right at the intersection of those gaps, right? So it was the conversation did, move forward, and I do think it was a productive one. But when you're able to move into that space and speak with authority, but balance, and I'm trying to find the right words here because it's not always easy, but you're able to balance the tension, recognizing that one party or the other, one group or the other may not change their value systems because that's the value that they're coming from. And in this situation, there was the researcher who was asking the question, who's been socialized and acculturated around publish or perish, and who has time to be out there doing stuff in the community, which someone could have just come back and said, well, you're doing your research on community members, not necessarily with community members. So it could have really gone sideways, but we were able to hold it together, and we moved the conversation forward, and people kind of left with smiles on their face. So we were happy about that. But what happens in these instances are you're trying to manage the room, and you're trying to move the conversation forward, and you're trying to make sure that you come out relatively unscathed and that other people don't, end up falling out, having fallouts because of it. So when you're the only one, or because you're the only one, or one of a very few, you're not just showing up as yourself. You're being read. You're being read as a category. You're being read as a symbol. You're being read as a representation. And that requires a level of calculation that most people never have to think about. So let's pause for a moment. I know I could use this. And let's just take a breath. Notice what's coming up for you as you hear this. Not what you think about it, but what you're actually experiencing. You might notice some tension. You might notice recognition, or you might notice nothing at all. And all of that is information. There's nothing you need to change right now, just notice. And if you're willing, just gently ask yourself, where do I feel this in my body? And what does this tell me about myself? How am I navigating these spaces? And from that place, you might start to ask and notice these questions that you've been carrying. So ask yourself, am I speaking as an individual, or will this be interpreted as me speaking for everyone like me? Whatever your category, demographic, representation is. Am I being evaluated on my work, or how well I perform acceptability? Am I allowed to be complex, or do I need to be careful? So hypervisibility is not just about being seen, it's about being seen before you're supported, before you're protected, and before you have real leverage. So the question becomes, what does it actually take to lead in spaces where you're both highly visible and structurally constrained? Because some people think the answer is, oh, I'll just work harder. Okay. I'll be sharper. Well, you probably are that already. Probably, maybe I should just be more prepared. Okay. I want you to really ask yourself, how much has harder work gotten you? How much has being sharper gotten you? And how much has being more prepared gotten you? And this is no judgment, because I have been all of those things, and I imagine you have been too. And that's not the real answer to the question, right? If you're highly visible and structurally constrained, those things are going to probably wear you out. And I say that not joking, just laughing, because I have been that and I have been worn out. So the real answer is really more about awareness, understanding the systems that you're operating in, and understanding where visibility is symbolic and where it translates into influence. And oftentimes, this requires you to just be still and be quiet and gather more data, right? The better you understand your operating system, the more effective and efficient you will be. So, it's also about recognizing this. There's a place for institutional work, there's a place for community work, but they don't function the same way, and they're not valued in the same way by the same systems, and they pretend they are. This is where a lot of people get stuck, and I don't want you to be stuck there. So, as you think about your own leadership, I want you to consider, where are you being made visible without real leverage? Where are you being included without real support? Where are you carrying expectations that were never designed with you in mind? Because excellence is not about how well you perform. It's also about understanding the structure you're performing inside of. And as we close out this season, I want to name something clearly. Across these conversations, we've been looking at different parts of the same structure. In February, we talked about the weight of leadership, how efforts can feel like it recesses instead of accumulates. And in this episode, we're looking at visibility, what it means to be seen without always having power. But when you put those two things together, you start to see a fuller picture. High-performing environments don't just ask for excellence. They often require people to carry weight while being watched, while navigating systems that weren't designed with them in mind. And that has a cost, not just professionally, emotionally, psychologically, and relationally. So the question we're left with is not just how do we succeed in these systems, but what does it like to lead without being depleted by them? That's where we're going next. Because if excellence comes with a cost, then we have to start asking ourselves, what makes leadership sustainable? What makes it human? And what might it look like to build something different? And if this is something you're navigating, I created a companion worksheet for this episode, which you can find in the show notes, to help you map where you're visible, where you have influence, and where there may be gaps between the two. Because once you see the pattern, you can start to change how you move within it. I'm Dr. Loren M. Hill, and this has been your Strategist Is In. As you move forward, pay attention to where you're being asked to carry weight and where you're being asked to carry visibility, and whether the structure around you actually supports either one. I'll see you next season.